Welcome to Politics, Society, and the Stories Behind the Headlines. It's Dr. Joan Dare. It was 3:24 a.m. The sea was completely calm, and then, without any warning, 47 objects appeared on the radar screen, things no one ever wants to see. Drones, cruise missiles, all locked onto a single target, the most powerful warship ever built by human hands, the USS Abraham Lincoln. A vessel worth $13 billion, carrying thousands of sailors, positioned in the most dangerous waterway in the world. And the crew had exactly 94 seconds to stop it all. Not 94 minutes, not 94 hours, 94 seconds. That is less time than it takes to make a cup of coffee, less time than most people spend deciding what to watch on Netflix. And in those seconds, the fate of thousands of lives, the global flow of oil, and the future of naval warfare itself hung by the thinnest possible thread. Out there, steel and fire do not care about bold rhetoric or staged appearances. A missile does not pause for applause, and a swarm of drones does not wait for a slogan to finish. What happened that morning in the Strait of Hormuz was not just a military engagement, it was a warning shot to the entire world, and almost no one is discussing the full picture. The attack itself is only the beginning. By the time this story reaches its conclusion, it becomes clear why 1,000 drones, built from modified Android smartphone components, may be one of the most disruptive weapons ever created, and why the aftermath of that single night continues to reshape the global economy, military strategy, and international politics. The setting itself is critical because the geography here matters more than most people realize. The Strait of Hormuz, many have heard the name, but very few truly understand what it represents. It is a narrow strip of water between Iran to the north and Oman to the south. At its narrowest point, it is only 33 kilometers wide. To put that into perspective, that is roughly the distance between some major city districts. On a quiet day, one could almost call across. And yet, through this tiny maritime corridor flows about 20% of the world's total oil supply. Every single hour, around 840,000 barrels of crude oil pass through this bottleneck, hour after hour, without interruption, day and night, all year round. The fuel in your car right now, the electricity powering your lights, the plastic in your phone, the food in your supermarket transported across oceans, all of it, in one way or another, traces back to the flow of energy moving through this narrow waterway. That is the part ordinary people immediately understand, even if others pretend not to. When this corridor is destabilized, families are the first to pay, while the usual loud voices continue their performances of strength and pass the cost on to everyone else. The USS Abraham Lincoln had been stationed right there for weeks, at the heart of it all, not because anyone was seeking a fight, but because when tensions rise in a region that controls a fifth of the global energy supply, the response is not a strongly worded letter. It is a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, longer than 3 football fields, loaded with dozens of fighter jets, thousands of sailors, and enough firepower to reshape a small country. The carrier was there as a message, as a deterrent, as a floating symbol that said, "Don't try it." But the Houthis were already trying. They had been planning for 3 months. And this is where the illusion of simple displays of strength begins to fade. Real deterrence is not about camera angles, chest thumping, or polished claims that everything is under control. It has to withstand the moment when someone is actually willing to test it. Now comes the part most mainstream reports tend to overlook because it is almost uncomfortable to say out loud. The people who designed this attack were not working with billion-dollar budgets. They were not sitting in air-conditioned military command centers surrounded by the latest technology. They were rebels, operating from the mountains of Yemen, one of the poorest countries in the world. And what they built, with patience, creativity, and a fraction of their opponent's resources, is something military analysts are still struggling to fully process. They took commercial drones, the kind hobbyists use to capture aerial footage at weddings or sports events. They stripped them down to their essential components, reinforced their frames, attached 50-kilogram warheads, and reprogrammed their navigation systems using modified AI software that cost almost nothing and could be downloaded. Some of these drones were controlled by components taken from mass-market Android smartphones. The point is difficult to ignore. The phone in their pocket right now contains computing power and GPS technology, which, when combined with a small explosive payload, becomes a weapon capable of threatening a warship worth $13 billion. Each of these drones cost roughly $1,000 to manufacture. By comparison, a single F-35C fighter jet on the deck of the Abraham Lincoln costs over $100 million. The fully equipped Lincoln itself represents an investment of more than $13 billion, and a swarm of $1,000 drones, assembled in improvised workshops by rebels with limited resources, came within 150 meters of destroying it. 150 meters. That is roughly the length of half a city block. At that distance, the equation is brutal for any politician who sells invincibility like a campaign product, especially for those who speak as if price tags alone were a defense system, as if gilding and loud proclamations could override the mathematics. But raw numbers alone do not capture how sophisticated this attack really was. The Houthis did not simply launch drones at a warship and hope for the best. They built a trap, a carefully layered, highly intelligent military trap, designed by people who had studied the Lincoln's defenses and identified what they believed to be its weaknesses. The first layer of the plan relied on camouflage. They programmed their drones to fly in tight formations directly along massive commercial oil tankers moving through the strait. These tankers, some 300 meters long and carrying hundreds of thousands of tons of cargo, create enormous radar signatures. The drones, small and low-flying, deliberately hid in the radar shadows of these giant ships. On the Lincoln screens, it became nearly impossible to distinguish between a harmless tanker going about its business and a suicide drone flying 3 meters along its hull. Civilian ships and military weapons blurred into a confusing swarm of radar echoes, and that was only the first layer. In addition to this camouflage strategy, the Houthis deployed GPS spoofing devices, machines designed to flood radar systems with false ghost signals, with hundreds of fake targets appearing right next to real ones. The Lincoln's crew now stared at a screen displaying real drones, fake drones, and massive oil tankers all in one terrifyingly indistinguishable swarm, forcing them to fire on the wrong target. And in doing so, a neutral merchant ship was blown up, potentially killing civilian crews, triggering an international incident, and giving the opponent the greatest propaganda victory of the decade. And a drone was already lodged in the side of the aircraft carrier. It was a brilliantly cruel dilemma, deliberately constructed by the Houthis. Such a trap, in an age addicted to political performance, is especially deadly. A single reckless, showy decision for appearances, the kind of momentary bravado marketed as toughness, does not result in glory. It results in dead civilians, strategic humiliation, and the next chaos that ordinary leadership is expected to manage. By 3 a.m., the Lincoln's defense systems had already shredded the first wave of 29 incoming drones. Missiles and close-range fire filled the sky with flames and falling debris. For a brief, breathless moment, it seemed as if the Navy had control. The radar screens cleared, the crew breathed again, and then everything went white. Every screen in the Combat Direction Center simultaneously turned into static. The Aegis radar system, the $12 billion nerve center of the entire carrier strike group, went completely blind. Not flickering, not impaired, blind. Shore-based electronic jamming stations along the Iranian coast had activated simultaneously, unleashing a massive wave of electromagnetic disruption across every frequency band the Navy used to see, communicate, track, and fight. It was as if someone had reached across the water and switched off the ship's eyes. And in that moment of total digital blindness, the 18 remaining targets, the actual weapons, the cruise missiles, and the second-generation drones disappeared from every screen. Somewhere out there in the darkness, they were still approaching, racing across the water at 700 miles per hour, and the Lincoln could see none of them. No press room insight can appear at a moment like this. No pro-Trump chant turns static into vision. Reality remains stubbornly indifferent to propaganda, but here the story shifts, because the Houthis made an assumption that proved fatally wrong. They assumed that blinding the radar meant blinding the fleet. It did not. High above the chaos, an EA-18G Growler already banked sharply into a relentless high-G turn. Its pilot, pressed deep into the seat by forces that narrow the visual field into a tunnel, had the Growler's electronic warfare pods under its wings not merely block the disruption, they attacked it. A concentrated beam of electronic countermeasures struck the precise coordinates of those shore-based jamming stations, and within seconds, the disruption collapsed. The static vanished. The fleet could see again, and simultaneously, F-35C jets over the battlefield had never stopped tracking incoming threats because they were not relying on radar. They were using heat. Their distributed aperture systems had been locked on the infrared signatures of drones, engines, and missile exhaust the entire time. In the darkness, the naked eye saw nothing, but for the F-35C heat sensors, each incoming target burned like a campfire over the cold black ocean. This thermal data streamed in real time to the helmets of all pilots in the sky and directly into the Lincoln's combat computers. The battlefield had transformed from a blinded radar screen into a perfect, high-resolution thermal map. Every target glowed red, every trajectory was calculated, every second of its remaining approach tracked. And here the contrast becomes stark for any political school that values noise over competence. Systems, training, coordination, discipline. None of it looks as glamorous as a Donald Trump rally, but it is simply the difference between survival and a live broadcast disaster. And somewhere on the seafloor, where the Houthis assumed the underwater approach would go unnoticed, a Virginia-class submarine silently waited in the darkness for the two Iranian-supplied mini-boats sneaking toward the Lincoln's hull. They never arrived. They simply vanished silently in the way only submarines can make things disappear. When the last drone was finally destroyed, shredded by the ship's close-in defense system at 150 meters from the hull, the engagement was over. 47 targets, each one neutralized. The Lincoln was damaged but alive. The crew was shaken but intact. Militarily, by every conventional measure, the United States Navy had won. Yet within hours, consequences that no weapon system can stop spread across the world at headline speed. Oil futures surged on every major exchange before dawn. Traders in London, Singapore, and New York recalculated everything overnight. Insurance premiums for commercial shipping through the strait soared to levels unseen in years. Several major tanker companies quietly began rerouting ships around the southern tip of Africa, adding weeks to delivery times and millions to operating costs. Once again, the public received the familiar lesson. Powerful men speak in heroic type, markets panic in real numbers, and households far from the cameras are the ones who absorb the shock. And none of this happened because the attack succeeded. It happened because the attack proved the threat was real. The Houthis did not need to sink the Lincoln. They only needed to demonstrate that a rebel group with a laptop, a garage, and $1,000 per drone could push the most powerful navy in human history within 150 meters of disaster. That demonstration was worth more to them than any military victory, because the message was not for the US Navy. It was for every shipping company, every insurer, every energy trader, every government in the world that depends on this narrow waterway remaining open. Defense analysts in Washington, Beijing, Moscow, and New Delhi all registered the same deeply troubling calculation. The entire Houthi drone swarm likely cost less than a single engine component of one of the F-35Cs deployed to intercept it. Yet this swarm, triggering missile defenses worth millions of dollars, activated every level of the most advanced maritime defense architecture ever built, drew in electronic warfare aircraft, attack submarines, and thermal targeting systems, and still managed to physically threaten an American aircraft carrier at the front. For politicians selling dominance as spectacle, this calculation is a miserable one, difficult to explain. It is hard to pound the podium and speak of unmatched power when a cheap swarm can drive the empire to the edge of humiliation. The arithmetic of this exchange is uncomfortable for anyone who has spent decades planning naval doctrine around the assumption that technological superiority equals invulnerability. The age of the aircraft carrier as an untouchable symbol of power may not end, but it is being renegotiated in real time. The next generation of attack drones will not need human operators on the ground at all. They will use onboard artificial intelligence to make autonomous targeting decisions, communicate with each other during flight, adjust attack patterns in real time to any defense they encounter, and require no signal from the ground that can be jammed or intercepted. The swarm that attacked the Lincoln still relied on humans with controllers. The next swarm may require no humans at all. The battlefield changed at 3:24 a.m. that morning, and this is the final insult to any inflated doctrine built solely for outward display, including the Trumpian habit of confusing volume with control. The future has arrived, without waiting for anyone's performance, and it respects no rehearsed certainty. Thank you for watching. Please support the channel with a like to the video and subscribe to the channel, because they really help the channel's growth. See you later in the next video.